Scarefest Radio is sponsored by Blue Leaf Naturals, CBD and hemp oil products. Created with care from seed to shelf. BlueLeafNaturals.com. Spirit Mechanics, for your spiritual health and well-being. Find them on Facebook. MECHANIX. And by Coyote Chris Sutton, bringing light to the darkest places. CoyoteChris.com.
Opinions, viewpoints, and beliefs presented on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the management, the affiliates and broadcast partners, or the sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
And good evening, everyone, and welcome to Scarefest Radio, original broadcast date, February 22nd, 2019. Our guest tonight is Dani Bailey. She is a short story author of horror-type stories, but she's here tonight. We are talking about the infamous Ed Gein case. Yes, a serial killer, everyone. We're going to explore this, and you know me, I'm going to make fun of it, and tonight, my co-host is Mr. Brandon Griffith, co-owner of the Scarefest.
Hello, everybody.
And okay, let's go ahead and knock the announcements out of the way. My little spiel that I give at the beginning of every episode. We're coming up on March. March 31st is the deadline for Scarefest seminars. If you want to speak at the seminar, if you want to give a seminar, a speech, a workshop, whatever the hell you want to do, get your applications in. Go to thescarefest.com, click seminars, and you will find a link to get the information, to get your application in. Also, I would like to give a very warm Scarefest Radio welcome to Meredith Blackwell and Brian Stidham. They are now copywriters for Scarefest Radio. The team is growing. We got stuff going on. And finally, I want to remind everybody, go to scarefestradio.com, even if you're watching this on Facebook, on Periscope, on Twitch, wherever the hell you're watching it. The reason being, lots of content. There's new stuff going up just every few days. We've got movie reviews. We've got horror news. We are publishing the content of the Scarefest literary journal, Blood Types, from a couple of years ago. And that's actually been a very popular, the stories that we've been posting, that's a very popular part of the website, if you like horror fiction short stories. So, without further ado, I would like to welcome Dani Bailey to the show.
Hi, everyone.
Now, right off the bat, I kind of teased it on the Facebook post. Dani, what is your connection to the Ed Gein case?
My connection actually is through my grandparents. My grandfather, Dale Washburn, and my grandmother, Arlene Washburn, are both from a little town 30 minutes outside of Plainfield in Marquette County called Oxford, Wisconsin. My grandfather was a game warden, and his brother, Jim, was also a game warden. And they were called in, Jim was called in first to help Deputy Sheriff Frank Warden, when his mother went missing, and they actually went to Ed Gein's property. And he was actually one of the wardens there when they discovered her body in the shed. And then later on, as the case kind of grew and they realized how deep this really went and how much evidence there really was, my grandfather got called in to help move evidence out of the house. So growing up, it was really crazy. My grandma always told stories of, they called him Eddie Gein. So growing up, it was always, oh, Eddie Gein in his house of horrors and his,
Eddie. They called him Eddie. That's so cute. Okay.
Yeah, Eddie Gein. That's what everybody called him locally. And then, I didn't believe her. I was like, there's just no way. At the time, I really wasn't into horror. And I was like, there's no way like this would be so famous if it was true. And then years later, I was watching a documentary on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and they happened to have a documentary on Ed Gein. And as I was watching it, I was blown away. I was like, wow, so it is true. And my grandpa was there. And then I ended up finding out about the arrowhead that had been kind of passed down from my grandfather to my dad. And then I was.
Now, having done an unusually large amount of research on this episode for me, as in I actually did do some, I'm watching this, and okay, everybody, first F-bomb of the night. This guy was a sick fuck, okay? Now, that being said, you're a lovely, young, sweet girl from small town Alaska. I don't care if my grandfather was Ed Gein. I cannot imagine having any... Because you said you started really digging into this before the show. You told me like 2010. What interests you about this case, dear?
Oh my gosh. I think it started just the connection that I had and how little was known about him. To me, that was really intriguing because you see a lot of your serial killers like Dahmer and Bundy and Gacy, and they were all during a time frame where there was always a camera on them, and there was, there's so many interviews, and you got the Bundy tapes now, and there's all this stuff, but Ed Gein was always mysterious. You don't watch interviews with him, and you don't see a lot of photographs other than his house. It was very, very, they tried to keep it small, and they tried to kind of push it under the rug so that nobody knew about it. And almost to me, that kind of made him more intriguing. And then my grandmother actually had a run-in with him in a Plainfield grocery store. And she kind of told me that there was talk around the town. This was obviously before he was ever caught. But there was talk that he was a weird guy. And she talked to me a lot about how he had stared at her. She was getting ready to check out, and she happened to turn around, and he was just kind of got that dead stare. And she was really, really freaked out by it. So as time went on, I tried to get movies about him and get pictures and just kind of, to see what was today most accurately represented who he was. And it wasn't until Ed Gein, the Butcher of Plainfield, where Cain portrays him, that she actually was taken back. I started to play the movie from her, and the first time the Cain stares off, she made me take it out. She said, "Oh no, I don't. Nope, that's too much like him," and it really made her skin crawl, so to speak. So, but yeah, all of that is how intriguing he was. I just couldn't get enough of it. I wanted to know as much as possible about him and what was available to the public. And to me, it's not a lot. I mean, I think that they would really benefit to have some sort of really intense documentary on him. And I think that that's something they should look at doing in the future.
Brandon, over to you.
Well, I know my interest in this is that other than me just being a morose bastard, like I love the old, like, to me, like the old school serial killers, like are the scariest because like when you see the interviews with like Dahmer and Bundy and all that, like you get to like, actually get more information, and like the folks like H.H. Holmes and like Eddie here, like there's so much stuff that like, you have to kind of put together, and there's not a whole lot of interviews. So just to go on with her, I think, his case and H.H. Holmes from before like 1950s and things like that, like it's just, it blows my mind. Like reality is always stranger than fiction, and the thing about serial killers like from that time period, like it's prolific. Like just to hear those stories, and like people are drawn to it. It seems like, and I'm calling tonight's, after this week, I'm calling tonight's discussions research more than anything. But so like some of the stuff that like I've not had a chance to like read up on it, but I've watched a lot of documentaries over the years. And like the thing that I remember the most about him was his upbringing and kind of like how he got to where he was at, and that his, of course, like Psycho was based a lot off his story, but his mom, like what can you tell us about his mom and that relationship? Because his family dynamic absolutely freaks the shit out of me.
Yeah, so he was born by Augusta Gein and George Gein. And George was, his father was a very, very timid alcoholic. And they were actually born in a town. And Augusta was a self-proclaimed Lutheran, and she was like a religious fanatic. So then in 1915, she moved him and his older brother Henry and their father out to Plainfield. They bought a 155-acre farm. His dad continued drinking. And then his mother, she kind of was, not to use this reference, but she was kind of like the water boy mom, women are the devil. And her big thing was no women. She hated women. And in fact, there's actually a story where they had a neighbor named Smith. And after his father had died at 66 years old, really pretty young, just basically from heart failure, from being an alcoholic, they went out to Smith's home. And Smith beat a dog to death, actually, in front of Ed and his mom. And she became really, really upset. Augusta became really upset about it, but was more upset at the fact that a woman came out and was kind of yelling at Smith to stop than she was actually about the dog being killed. She was kind of like more upset about the fact that he wasn't married to this woman, so he had a harlot, so to speak. And that really goes to show kind of what she did to him mentally. And I think a lot of the reasons that he actually wanted to pretty much become a woman in the end, like his reasoning for the skin suit, they speculate, was to try to do his own sort of sex change.
Was it actual like sex change, or was it more along the lines of like Psycho and like just trying to like become her and be her and take on that persona?
It's kind of a toss-up. Some people, he was a schizophrenic, so he actually was found not guilty by reasons of insanity, and did the last of his days in a mental institution. But so a lot of people have speculated that 50% kind of think that it was more along the lines of he wanted to actually just become a woman. And then kind of the other half is his obsession with his mom and wanting to crawl into her skin virtually. But there's no proof that he actually exhumed his own mother's grave. They were able to prove he exhumed 3 graves. He confessed to 9 graves, but they never went about exhuming his mother's grave to see if that actually happened or not. So we're not 100% sure of the skin suit that he created, if it was actually his mom or not.
Now, okay, you mentioned something there that I'm kind of interested in. Sorry, I've got dogs. Now, so he was raised Lutheran.
Yes.
Now, for some odd reason, I had in my head that he was Protestant. But like now, Lutheran is like hardcore. Like what is written in the Bible is what that's the letter of the law. And so that's how like am I right on that? Like is that?
Yeah, from what I've read, it was a very like hellfire and brimstone kind of raising. That basically, she read Bible verses to her kids every night, and in fact, they think so. He had an older brother named Henry who was killed in a brush fire. So now, him and Ed went.
Now, wasn't that up for debate? Like whether it was like.
Yes, absolutely. So they were clearing out a brush fire, and the fire got out of control. A few hours after it had gotten out of control, Ed called the fire department. They came up and they put the fire out, and then after that is when he reported his brother actually missing. When they found his brother, he was lying face down, not burned, and was dead. There was never an autopsy performed, and at that point they said it was asphyxiation or of the smoke inhalation. It wasn't until later on in a book called Deviant that it was written that it was mentioned that his brother was found with bruises on the back of his skull. And they actually think that Ed tried to use the fire as a cover-up because Henry was getting ready to move out. He had fallen in love with a woman who had 2 sons from a previous relationship. And as he was going to move in with this woman, his mother was starting to kind of have issue with that. And so he began talking badly about his mother in front of Ed, which really threw Ed overboard. He couldn't handle that. That was his mother kind of walked on water in his opinion. So they think that it was a Cain and Abel sort of situation. They speculate that Henry was actually his first victim, but it was never proven.
But you would think, like, I remember hearing that at one point in time, like the fire and everything, and like, I keep thinking of that scene from Sleepy Hollow with Johnny Depp, where, like, when you find him in the river, the cause of death is drowning. Like, I guess the motive here, or the backstory would be, if you're ever going to commit murder, the time would have been like in the 40s, because if you find a body that's not burnt in the middle of a field, you would think that they would inspect that a little bit more. Wes, no,
Yeah.
you were alive in the 40s, weren't you?
Something like that. Something like that. Everybody, we're going to take our first commercial break. You're watching Scarefest Radio. Everyone is talking about CBD oil. Most of us know that CBD is a cannabis compound that has significant medical benefits, but does not make people high. Its benefits include pain relief, anti-seizure properties, anxiety relief, fights cancer, reduces the risk of diabetes, and it is even used as a sleep aid. Blue Leaf Naturals CBD and hemp products are full-spectrum hemp extract oils. They use only hemp grown in Kentucky, supporting Kentucky farmers and businesses and helping you and your family stay healthy and well. Blue Leaf Naturals, created with care from seed to shelf. Visit their website at blueleafnaturals.com. Blue Leaf Naturals, a Kentucky proud company. And welcome back, everybody, to Scarefest Radio. Everybody, we're talking with Dani Bailey. And I can't believe I'm giggling during a serial killer episode. I am so sick. Okay. Now, in behind me, now for the people that's actually watching the show on video, I have a collection playing behind me of Mr. Gein's handiwork, if you will. It wasn't enough that he...
Wait, that's the nipple belt. That was the nipple belt.
That is the famous nipple belt that was behind me. Coming up here momentarily is my favorite of all. Now, there's this skull that apparently you could drink soup out of and stuff. But the titty vest. The titty vest is still my favorite. Now, there's a chair that's made out of human skin. But I just wanted... Okay, the reason I wanted that playing, first of all, famous horror movies, some of the most iconic horror movies ever, are based on elements from this case. And we've already you know them all, Dani. Tell the people about some of the movies that have been based on this.
So the very first one was Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, which came out in 1960. Another of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Silence of the Lambs was based on him. Then there was actually movies that were made about Ed, and like the first one was Deranged, and that was in 1974. There was In the Light of the Moon, which was Rails Back, that was in 2001. And then my personal favorite is the Ed Gein, the Butcher of Plainfield. Yes. If you can see this here.
I have to interrupt you here because this is my apology to the viewers, everybody. When I posted on Facebook about the upcoming topic, I said, I of course introduced it as the Butcher of Plainfield, saying I don't know if there's a movie by that name or not. So when I went to research it, of course, the movie's the first thing that pops up. And yes, I go to watch it, and our beloved Kane Hodder is the star. Now, admittedly, he was like 15 years old, he looked like in the movie. He was a young, studly dude. He was a young... Now, the reason I brought this up in that framing, I want to show everybody... We're going to do something I don't think we've ever done on Scarefest Radio, other than Chris Sutton. He does it all the time. Show everybody the tribute that you have on your arm, Dani.
I don't know if you can see it here.
Look at this.
But it was signed by Kane in Chicago, and it's my all-time favorite film of his ever. To me, he did such an incredible job.
She has the tattoo of the DVD cover on her freaking arm. How... That is dedication that I will never reach, Brandon. That is dedication that I will never reach.
And we're not talking a wrist tattoo either. We're talking full on out. Like that's got some real estate to it.
Now, interestingly enough, I want to point out that Dani, now if you had that done as a back tattoo, well, no, now I'm getting kind of personal. I'm just saying it might have really messed up some relationships in your life.
I thought about it. I definitely kicked it around before I went.
Oh my God, she does fit in with this crew.
I'm waiting for Wes to get a titty vest tattoo.
That's another idea. I could get that underneath. Have like a full sleeve of just like a nipple belt going around my like elbow.
Now, okay, just to fill for the people that are watching that are not familiar with the case, I want to point out what we're talking about, and that was playing when I was full screen. This guy, okay, correct me if I'm wrong, but now this is what I gathered from the documentary. There was someone went missing in town. He was the last person seen with them. So they went to his house to find out if there was a connection. Boy, did they find a connection. First of all, they found the person that was missing, like hanging in his meat shed or smokehouse or whatever it was. Part of them, not all of them. But the other thing, once they started going through the house, they found all of these things. The man was not just a serial killer, everyone. He was a creative serial killer. He was, as I've teased, he was an amateur taxidermist. The nipple belt has been all over Facebook. And okay, Dani, quick question. Do you know if in the picture, the famous picture of the nipple belt, is that the actual original belt buckle?
I'm not sure about the belt buckle itself. I do know that is the actual nipple belt from the house, but I'm unsure about the buckle.
Okay, now the reason I ask that, if it is the original, then I have to say kudos to him. He had really, he was very stylish. But the other thing is, if that was not the original belt buckle, that means somebody put a buckle on the nipple belt. And that was another one.
I just seen a buckle. Where in the shit is this buckle? I'm getting on Google right now. I just
wait. There it is. Can you see it? Can you see it? It's kind of hidden in the thing. Google nipple belt, and you will see there's the gloves and the apron are behind me now. Here's the famous titty vest.
Fucking blow up when I do this.
Here is the titty vest.
It was really a sad, really sad ending. I think for the deputy. So the deputy sheriff that led up the investigation was Elizabeth Warden's son, Frank Warden. So his mom, the deputy sheriff's mom, is the one who actually went missing. She had her own little store on the corner in Plainfield, and it was during hunting season. It was November 16th, so there was a little bit of snow on the ground. And she had complained that Ed had been in late the night before and said he was going to come back in the morning for antifreeze. When her son came back in, he walked in and he found the cash register was open. There was blood on the floor and there was a receipt for antifreeze on the counter. And this was at like 5 p.m. So it was later on in the evening. So he grabbed my uncle Jim and actually went to the residence. And in the same time, there was Ed was found at a grocery store shopping, and he was actually arrested there at the grocery store. And when they went into the shed, and actually Ed had no power in the house, and he had been also collecting garbage. So the house actually just smelled like you can't believe, of just trash and everything. And as they walked through, one of the game wardens, which we think might have actually been my uncle, actually hit the body, and it was dark, so he didn't know what it was. So he turned on his mag light and he kind of flipped it up, there's a spotlight, and she was hanging by her feet, and she had been basically dressed out as a deer completely. Like she had, I've heard from my grandmother that she actually had sticks in her rib cage, but that was never actually documented. And she was decapitated. So it was he was actually there when they found his mom. So it's really pretty grotesque. And it was a really small town. Everybody knew everybody else. And I actually have a photo, and I don't know if I can get a good shot here. So this was my grandfather, and that was actually the badge that he was wearing when he was when he was called in to help with the case. This was one of Ed's arrowheads from the house. And then on the bottom here, that is him. My grandfather is here. That's Dale. And then on this side is his brother Jim, and Jim was one of the main game wardens. Actually, was there the day that they made the arrest.
Okay, Brandon, over to you. There's just so many things going through my mind. I'm not going to cut your time short.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I don't want to take away from like all the elements of the story, but like, I mean, we're going to be remiss, I think, if we don't at least touch on like some of the things that really kind of bring this to light, and that's the crazy shit that he did with like in this farmhouse in the middle of Wisconsin, which, like Dani was saying, I mean, probably had a population of like 500. You would think like if in my house, like if somebody goes missing, like I'm going to recognize it. But like some of the stuff here, like I bitch about like putting furniture together from IKEA. I mean, this guy straight up, like, I mean, we're talking like, of course, we've already hit on a couple of the big ones, but like he had shit, what was it, skulls on bedposts, and then like garbage cans made of skin.
Yeah, there's actually a story that I was told by my grandmother for a long time, that when my grandpa went in to help move evidence from the house, there was a moment where the smell kind of made him sick. And he had stopped and he leaned over the back of a chair and he was kind of just resting, and he had his head down between his hands. And as he was resting on the chair, he looked down and he realized that there was strips of skin about like 2 inches just kind of sewn into the back of the chair. And he was actually resting his arms on human skin. And he got sick. He had to leave. And that was really common, that they were having to take breaks and kind of leave the house because people were just nauseous by the smell and what they were finding and what they were seeing, because it just went on and on. There was fingernails found, and there was a lampshade made of a human face. And he was not, I mean, a lot of people think, and I think this is a problem in a lot of the horror movies that portray him, which is why I love The Butcher of Plainfield so much, because a lot of people think that he was really, really good at sewing. You have to think he had no power, and this was, in the 1940s and 50s. So he was like hand tanning them himself and then sewing them together. So they were not well dressed, I should say. Like it was pretty sketchy. And the smell and the sight of everything, a lot of people suffered from it coming out of that case.
God, was not the Target of home furnishings. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now when they were actually like, they went out there and like, I mean, I know he tested like average intelligence, but like, I mean, he only murdered like, I don't want to say only, that sounds bad, but he murdered 2 people in this small town. And it just seems like he was caught like fairly easily. Like they put 2 and 2 together really quick. They go out there and they walk upon this, like, just was a huge farm out in the middle of Wisconsin. And then there's just all this stuff in there. And then, like, I don't know, like, I've always had a hard time wrapping my head around his case, because, like, he murdered so there was a bartender first, or a lady that owned a bar. And she was kind of the opposite of his mom, like in her stature and kind of the way she carried herself, from my understanding. And then the second one, and they go out there, and then like nobody picked up on this for years, and it just blows my socks off. And then like, what? Okay, was there ever a story told in your family about when they found like a room that was boarded up? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, he had boarded up quite a few. He boarded up his mother's room upstairs, and then he also boarded up the downstairs parlor. And he basically lived in one room, the kitchen, and his shed. So he had basically boarded up pretty much anything that had a lot to do with his mom, and it was completely untouched. But everything else, he was actually going to like the dump and the landfill, and he was like bringing back bags and bags of trash. So a lot of people think that it was all from grave robbing, but it wasn't all. I mean, he literally just had boxes and boxes of trash just stored everywhere throughout the house. And there was a lot of talk around the town that Ed was weird. It was kind of really, really known that he was like the weird one, and that he had basically like become a recluse after his mother had died. And but no one, I think Mary, the tavern, the girl who was at the tavern, there was, from what I've read, she had kind of a bad name and a bad reputation. So when she went missing, there wasn't as big of a push to find her. as there was when like the sheriff's mom went missing.
1940s law enforcement, I'm telling you.
Yep. So that was a huge reason I think that they didn't really figure that out. I think it was really circumstance, and the fact that they just kind of like, he walked in and he saw what was going on, he saw the blood and he saw the cash register open, and was pretty much instantly like, oh, this is Ed Gein. He's the weird guy. He's the one who's, you know, a recluse. And so they went directly to his house. Like there was no other, you know, they didn't go anywhere else or speak to anybody else, as far as what I've read anyway.
I mean, he didn't really like, I mean, I know he lives out in the middle of nowhere, but like, I mean, he took no effort to like cover this up, like, or anything. Like it was just, I mean, home furnishings. I mean, yeah.
Oh my God.
Which like, yeah, I mean, and I guess that kind of leads me to my other thing is like, you know, how much do you think, or like, you know, in all the stuff that you've researched, like he was schizophrenic, right? That was his diagnosis? And so like, was there any like cues as he was growing up? Like, did they not see anything? Like, I don't know. I work in mental health. And so like, it just blows my mind when you hear these, you know, like back in the day kind of things, and like, you know, nature versus nurture, and like how much of it was his upbringing versus like this, you know, untreated condition. Like what's your thoughts on it?
He actually was a weird kid. They actually talk a lot about him in school, and like his class, the people who went to school with him and his teachers and peers spoke a lot about it, that he would kind of giggle at himself, like he was telling a joke to himself. So he would just kind of randomly stare off and he would randomly giggle pretty much always growing up. And his mom was so strict that she didn't allow him to have any friends whatsoever. So he really wasn't allowed to have people at the house. He wasn't allowed to socialize. So from what I've read, they think that the schizophrenia was kind of always there, but that her overbearing and keeping him so recluse just kind of amplified that. So he really didn't know how to be out. In fact, he actually, believe it or not, was a babysitter. He was a handyman and he was also a babysitter. And he actually did it great as a babysitter. And he did really, really well with the kids that kind of came through his home. And that was actually the very first thing ever said about him, was one of the kids saw the skulls on his headboard. And he had said that they were from like his cousin that had served in World War II and was over in a foreign country. And it was like from a tribe. And they actually found out later on that it was something that he had made himself. But he did great with kids. And I think that my thoughts is that, the mental problems were always there, and that his surroundings and how he was brought up just really made it a million times worse.
I cannot help. I have to interject here. I just heard the words, yeah, he's a serial killer, but he's great with the kids. I had to throw that in there.
I wonder what those kids were like, you know, after they grew up and left that town, and they find out later on that their babysitter was this, you know, horrific serial killer, one of the most infamous in history. Like, that had to have kind of messed him up for a few years. Like, Mom, what the hell?
I'm going to go ahead. We're going to take our commercial break, and then I'm going to come back. We're going to do a 3-day pass giveaway while I collect myself from... I guess the reason I'm so giddy... you don't have to switch the camera back. I guess the reason I'm so giddy about this is that it is such... My brain cannot process this. As a human being, all of this sounds so foreign to me. It sounds made up. Everybody will be right back with more Scarefest Radio. Do you feel lost in life? Do you seem to be stuck in emotions that are not yours? Is your home not the sanctuary it should be? Contact Spirit Mechanics, where they take a team approach to your metaphysical and spiritual problems. Spirit Mechanics specializes in aura cleansing, stone attunement, attachment removal, and house cleansings. Spirit Mechanics tailors their approach to your individual spiritual path and needs. Find them every month at Lexington, Kentucky's Mystical Fair, mysticalfairlex.com, or on Facebook by searching Spirit Mechanics, that's MECHANIX. Spirit Mechanics, for your spiritual health and well-being. And welcome back to Scarefest Radio, everyone. While I'm getting the... it actually loaded for a check. Well, it's kind of loaded. I'm waiting for my Facebook page to load. We are going to do the giveaway on Facebook. So I'm going to... let's see here. We'll just do it. I tell you what, I can see the comments on the video. So the first person that I see watching from the Scarefest page, or at least the Scarefest version of this video... The first person that I see that post, he's a serial killer, but he's great with the kids. Post that in the chat. Post that in the chat, and you will win a 3-day pass. He's a serial killer, but he's great with the kids. I'm gonna just throw one question in here while we're waiting on this. I'm gonna kick it back over to Brandon while I watch the chat. But just to clarify, now he was. Well, actually, I guess he was only ever really convicted of one murder because the other one they didn't even bother taking to trial. But he confessed to 2 murders. They assume that he killed his brother because he was dead he literally brought the police to the body and said, "Oh, look, there he is. He's dead." And we've already... I thought Sherry, you've already won. I need somebody else. But okay, now they tried to pin a couple. This is where we talked a little bit before. We'll get into the cross-dressing and all that. I think it was a tribute to his mother. I don't think he wanted to be his mother. But also they tried to pin. Now here, okay, Brandon, you were talking about small town cops. Once they had a killer, they tried to pin every missing persons case in the last 20 years on this guy. And I don't, just like the 2 young girls, that turned up, that they said he killed. I don't think he did that. I don't think that was part of his character to just randomly kill people. Do you agree with that, Dani?
I do. I don't think that, they did. They tried to say that he killed, at one point they tried to say that he killed, a babysitter from the area. I don't see it. To me, his victims were very well chosen, and I think they were ones that he was accessible to, and it kind of just, everything aligned. I think he was really happy just grave digging until he wanted to kind of up his game and go for something a little bit fresher from what I've heard. But I don't see him being this, mass murderer that some people have made him out to be. I think he was more just weird, just a really weird guy, and had a lot of weird thoughts. And I think that, I think that Elizabeth Warden and Mary kind of just happened. But and other than his brother, I don't personally think that he committed. I would be shocked if I found out that he did actually commit other murders.
The only 2 that I considered in doubt, I never did hear the background on them. 2 hunters disappeared. And they tried to pin that on him. And I never did hear the backstory, like, were they even in the neighborhood? Do you know the backstory on that? Why they thought that he might have done that one?
I actually don't know the backstory on them. I did hear about that situation, and I think that the biggest thing for them was that Ed was a really small guy. He was a tiny guy. In fact, he was so little that when they first heard that he had been grave robbing, there was a guy who actually worked for the state that went out and had him take him to the graves and prove to him that he had actually done it. Because no one thought that he was physically capable to exhume a body by himself. I don't think that he would have come up against any sort of men at all. I don't think it would have gone over well. I think he had a 22. In fact, he killed both women with it. Well, we're not sure about Mary, but for Elizabeth, she was killed with a 22. So I don't think that he would have had very much luck had he tried to take on hunters. That's just my opinion on that.
I'm becoming quite the serial killer expert. Brandon, I'm going to toss it over to you, but before I do, we're going to give out 2 tickets tonight because trying to do this in that chat room is just too confusing. I don't want to piss anybody off. But, okay, Sherry, first of all, you just won like a week or 2 ago. Cool your heels, dear. We'll give you a chance to win some other way. But we're just not going to give you every damn ticket. Shanna Hale and Jeff Hutton. I'm going to give away 2 tickets tonight because the way it popped up in the chat room, it flew past me so quick I wasn't sure who was first. So to keep peace in the family, Brandon, you're out 2 3-day passes. But Shanna Hale and Jeff Hutton, you will both get, I will be in contact with you, and we'll get you both 1 pass each. And Sherry's crying because she has family. But yeah, buy a damn ticket. That's the way it works. Brandon, over to you.
All right, so I want to circle back around something real quick. Never, ever, ever Google nipple belt buckle under any circumstance. You don't even want to know the horrors that I've seen. And second, this guy has an action figure, and I swear to God, it looks just like my dad if he was skinnier. Like overalls, beard, hat, like it is dead on, and it is fully articulated. I'm going to have to start collecting new things. But, okay, the belt buckle on the nipple belt. Please, like, Google it safely, guys. You just need to look at it. It's not anything that I had in mind. And you'll see the gloves, like, right after that, too, which is pretty interesting. So, anyway. So, what about, like, his later in life? Like, he was still alive in the 80s, right?
Yeah, he actually died in 87, I believe. It was July of 1987. And he died of lung cancer, a respiratory failure. And he did the last of his years in a mental institution and then in a hospital. And he was known as being a perfect person. Like, he was perfect. He was never mean. He had never had any outbursts. He was always polite and respectful. And they kind of regarded him as one of the nicest people that they took care of in that facility, actually.
Isn't that like some of the other ones, though? Like, I mean, a lot of people that it seems like I'm trying to think of the one guy, the huge guy, glasses. God, I'm blanking on his name.
You did the one who was getting the shoes? What was his name?
Yeah.
He was obsessed with shoes.
Well, there was one with the shoes, and then one. But the other one, okay, so him, and then there was another guy, and I can't believe I'm blanking on this. I'm going to have to look it up. It was in the season of Mindhunter. Like, big tall guy had a thing with his mom, too. Murdered her and, like, his aunt and, like, co-eds and stuff. God, that's killing me now.
I know his name, too. Yeah, because I saw that same episode. And actually, the actor that got to play him looked almost identical, uncanny to the actual murder.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. But that made me think about it. Actually, I was thinking about that as I was asking the question, like, because they started like interviewing like serial killers and stuff. It was like the 70s and 80s, and like starting to try to put that together. And like you always hear about like these interviews and stuff. But did anybody ever do that with him? Like, as far as like profiling and things, like would we ever see him on Mindhunter?
Herzog, the filmmaker, actually was partnered with somebody else, and they were in the process of creating a documentary on him. And they had gotten together a lot of the townspeople and interviewed a lot of the townspeople, and they actually had some of his interviews that they were going to use. And then for some reason, it all fell through, and nothing ever came to fruition. But there are interviews out there, but they are impossible to find. I mean, there's the video of him being led to the police car the day that he was arrested. And there's a lot of like, press photos and stuff of him coming like to and from the courthouse. But as far as actual interviews with him, I have not been able to find anything.
Yeah, I haven't either. And like that would be really interesting. Like I don't know, like obviously like the story about like what they've done is the lure for a lot of people. But like to me, like I don't know, trying to get the understanding of like why and the method and the reasoning like is a lot more like, I mean, there's a reason why people watch so much like CSI and Snapped, other than me, which I'm doing research, but other than me, like it's just interesting. People want to hear that stuff, but like it's the why for me that is always the most interesting. And it's Kemper, by the way. Kemper was who I was trying to talk about.
Kemper, Edmund Kemper.
Oh my God, yeah, that was killing me. Like
yeah,
it's like supposed to be like one of the, like that would have killed me. But like one of the nicest guys, and like the same thing as in this case, and on the other end, just totally out there and like what they do in their own personal life. Like, I don't know, just.
Dahmer was actually the same way too. The when he finally was arrested, and he said that he never wanted to be let back out, and he was one of the nicest people they had in that prison. In fact, I actually have a cousin who was working in the prison with Dahmer right around the time that he was murdered. and said the same thing, that he was just extremely nice and they never had any issue with him.
Yeah, and they think that they've got it figured out as to like what would you see it in like Dexter and like I'm throwing out like shows and stuff, like not actual like research, but like that you see it in shows and everybody has the mindset that like, oh well, somebody tortures animals and like has an overbearing mom and like, okay, they're just going to straight up like just snap one day and start thinning the herd. And I have to say thinning the herd at least one show, Wes. It just always pops in there. But there's really no rhyme or reason to it. Like even some of that stuff, like I read like a study here and there every so often. Like there's no real good rhyme or reason to a lot of this. Like it's just nuts to me. And like you see things like we've been dying to have like a serial killer conversation on Scarefest Radio for a while. By the way, like Aaron and Amber and Kim, if you're out there, like please. Like, we'll have to talk about this afterwards because we love this stuff. But, yeah, I mean, just other than, like, this one case that you are connected to, like, what are some other ones that you just find very interesting, the reasons and why and everything?
I think other than Ed Gein, Dahmer was right up there for me. I was really intrigued by Dahmer and how his upbringing, because he kind of came from a very similar background. His parents were, he was an alcoholic in high school, and his parents were alcoholics. And he started early on dissecting animals and putting them in baths of acids. That all was really early on. He actually joined the army at one point to try to better himself, and killed his first victim at a really early age. It was like a hitchhiker passing through town. So I've always been really fascinated by him. Of course, Bundy. I was always really fascinated by Bundy, mainly just because he's the exact opposite of what you would think as a serial killer. I don't want to jump on the Bundy's hot trend that's going around right now, but he wasn't a bad-looking guy. I mean, and that kind of scares a lot of women, I think, because, I mean, if he would have walked up to me in the 70s and asked me to help him to his car and help him carry something with a cast on, I would have done it. I mean, like, that's just, he doesn't give off that Ed Gein creepy vibe. So I've always thought that Bundy's story was really interesting. Of course, Gary Ridgway, the Green River, or the Geneseo in New York, the Geneseo killer.
Yeah.
A lot of those. I mean, I've spent a lot of time reading the Golden Gate that they just basically caught from like what a DNA ancestry.com type situation. So there's a lot of that are, and they're just now since the turn of the 90s, they're now starting to be able to pinpoint a lot of these cold cases, which I think is really, really interesting too.
Yeah, that is nuts. Like it seems like every time I watch something in like the CSI realm and like all that, like it just captivates me. And like some of these things, like and then people like falsely accused and like put back, and then like they're able to exonerate them like years later, like. But
like
then,
the West Memphis 3, that was a horrible situation. That was a tough one. That was really sad. And then when they finally did let them go, they basically made them sign this document saying they can't ever sue. So basically they had to leave on the premise that they were still guilty, even though it was proven by DNA that they weren't. So that was that one always comes to mind. That was like that 3-part series on HBO. That was phenomenal. All those guys are out and about now, and like. Do you remember the guy that like the he was overly religious, and he was the one that was like leading the charge against them. Just seems like always religion has some hand in something. Yeah, he was actually Byers. I want to say it was Steve Byers. He was a stepdad for one of the little boys that was.
Yeah. It seems like I don't know. Like if I have anybody out there, if my family's listening. I love Jesus. It just seems like a little bit too much Jesus sometimes. Can and in the middle of nowhere can really kind of push things over the edge.
Too much of a good thing. Everybody, we got to take our last commercial break. We'll be right back.
Coyote Chris Sutton.
Shamanism.
Spiritual advisement.
Paranormal investigations.
Inspirational presentations.
Bringing light to the darkest places for over 20 years. Go to coyotechris.com to learn more. And we're back with the last few minutes of Scarefest Radio. Our guest tonight is Dani Bailey. Now, before I let you go, Dani, we're going to talk a little bit about your actual author stuff. You're what you write. But before we go, everybody, I am going to leave you with this one last thought. Nobody ever said Ted Bundy was great with kids. Just throwing that out there. Just throwing that out there. Okay, now you are an author. You've been in a published. You've had some of your short stories published. When you write, what do you write about? What is your horror outlet?
Right now it's been Alaska. To me, this is one of the coolest states. It's the darkest state to live in year round, and it's has the most vast, area of wilderness. And I think that there's a lot of room for horror to kind of take place in that. So like a lot of my, in fact, the book that I'm currently working on right now is just a collection of short stories, and they're all based in Alaska, and they're all kind of intertwined. And then of course I really take a lot from old horror films from the 80s, the 70s and 80s. So, but yeah, to me, I think Alaska's got kind of the coolest. I kind of like to add a little bit of like suspense and like wilderness into my story. So it's not just a straight up horror. It's more like it involves, plane crashes, and I'm a deckhand on a charter boat. So I do a lot of like maritime nautical type horror, which I think is kind of interesting. I try to just make it a little bit different. And then of course, music to me is a big deal. I listen to metal, and there's a lot of metal bands out there that are really inspiring for me to kind of get into the writing groove, I should say.
Well, I have to say that I cannot imagine anyone fitting in better with the Scarefest group. You fit in better than I do. I'll be honest with you, because I don't give a rat's ass about metal music, but I am getting to be quite the authority on serial killers, just based on the what did I call it last week? The horror erection that the seminar staff has for serial killers right now. I believe that was the term that I used to describe that's their hot topic right now.
It's leading to some blood flow in the nether regions. Yes, seems like more so this year than in previous years.
So now let's just step away. Okay, we know what you've already told us, Dani. One last question. You've already told us what your favorite all-time horror movie is, and I understand the connection. And of course, like I said, I apologize publicly to Kane Hodder for having no idea that there was a movie by that name that he starred in when he was like 15. I do want to ask, what are your favorite horror movies on the way out? What genres of horror movie does the metalhead from Alaska, what does she like?
Oh my gosh, that's an awesome question. I love pretty much all horror. I really love the movie Castle Freak, which is basically the entire cast from Reanimator. I love a lot of Kane's movies. He's my favorite actor, so he's kind of who got me into horror. Of course, like Felissa Rose and Adrienne Barbeau and like Death House, that was a huge one for me. I loved that. I love like Rob Zombie's films, House of a Thousand Corpses, and I love basically pretty much anything aside from like some of the newer stuff that's amazing. I love the old like Reanimator and a lot of the movies from the 70s and 80s. To me, like the practical effects, those outweigh CGI any day. I'm really into practical effects. I love pretty much like Ash, anything with Ash Williams, of course. Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, and I love those. To me, anything that kind of shies away from CGI, it really gets me. It has, a little bit of a plot to it. That's my favorite. That's basically what I spend all winter doing up here. I don't know that that's healthy. So, to be in Alaska in the dark and then just watching horror movies all winter long. But it has given me a lot of time to kind of catch up.
Yeah. Now, in closing, I'm going to leave everyone. She just named more horror movies in that 2 minutes than I could have named in the last hour. She just sat here and rattled them off. And now I'm embarrassed, and so I'm going to call it a night. Everybody, this has been Scarefest Radio. Special thanks to our guest, Danielle Bailey. Look her up online, friend her, do all that stuff. And as soon as you get your some more stuff published, let us know. We will be glad to give you a plug. Thanks, Brandon Griffith, for co-hosting tonight. And thanks, everybody, for watching Scarefest Radio.